The morning they took me to see the four colors, I thought my daughter finally wanted to make things right between us. She had called the week before, which was unusual. We had not spoken much since her father passed. That was 3 years ago, and the silences between us had grown into something solid, something I had stopped trying to push through. But she called, and her voice sounded warm, and she said, "Mum, you've been cooped up in that house too long. Let's go up to the Smoky Mountains before the leaves are all gone." And I said yes before I even finished thinking about it, because I missed her. I missed who she used to be. Her husband drove. He always drove. I sat in the back seat with my purse on my lap and watched the trees change from green to amber as we climbed higher on the highway. We stopped once at a gas station in Tennessee, and he bought me a coffee without me asking. I remember thinking, maybe things really are different now. Maybe this is the beginning of something good. We pulled off the main road around noon. He said there was a trail that looked out over the whole valley, a short one, easy on the knees. My daughter helped me out of the car. She held my arm going up the path. We walked maybe 15 minutes until we reached a flat rock with a view that took my breath away, the whole mountain ridge going orange and red and gold as far as I could see. "Stay here a minute, Mum," she said. "We're going to get the camera from the car." I sat down on the rock. I set my purse beside me. I watched a hawk circle slowly over the valley. I heard the car door. I heard the engine. I turned around and the car was gone. I want you to understand what that moment felt like, because I have tried to explain it to people since, and they always say, "That must have been terrifying," and I nod. But terrifying is not the right word. Terrifying is a roller coaster, a near miss on the highway. What I felt sitting on that rock was something quieter and much worse. It was the recognition that someone who called me Mum had looked at me and calculated that I was worth more dead than alive. That feeling does not have a clean name. My purse was still there. I almost laughed at that. They had left my purse. But when I opened it, my phone was gone. I remembered my daughter putting her hand on my arm to help me up the path, and I understood. She had taken it then. The purse was left because it would have looked strange to take it from me directly. I had my wallet, $11 in cash, and my Medicare card and a library card and a Kroger Rewards card. No cell phone. No idea where exactly I was except somewhere off a secondary road in the Smokies, and the trail behind me had forked twice on the way up. I am 67 years old. I have arthritis in my left knee, and I take a blood pressure medication every morning at 8 o'clock. I had not taken it that day because we left early, and I had forgotten it on the kitchen counter. I sat on that rock for what I think was about 10 minutes, and then I stood up, picked up my purse, and started walking back down the path. The thing about being in the woods alone when you are not young is that your body starts making decisions. Your mind hasn't approved yet. My knee ached within the first 10 minutes, but my legs kept moving. I followed the path back to where it forked, and I chose wrong the first time. I knew it within a quarter mile when the path narrowed to nothing, and I turned around and went the other way. I came out on the side of the road around mid-afternoon. Not the road we had come in on, something smaller, 2 lanes, no markings I recognized. I started walking in the direction that felt downhill, which is the only instinct I trusted at that point. A pickup truck slowed beside me after maybe 20 minutes. The woman driving it was somewhere in her 50s, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and a cooler in the truck bed. She looked at me the way people look at something that doesn't belong where it is. "You need a ride somewhere?" I told her I had gotten separated from my group. It was the simplest version of the truth I could manage. She did not ask follow-up questions, which I will be grateful for as long as I live. She just said, "I'm heading into Maryville. That work?" It worked. She bought me a sandwich at a gas station on the way without making a thing of it. She said she had a mother in Knoxville and that she tried to call her every Sunday. when she dropped me off at a motel near the edge of town, a day's inn, the kind with an exterior walkway, she pressed a $20 bill into my hand and said, "I hope whatever happened today turns out all right." Then she drove away, and I never got her name. I stood outside that motel for a moment just breathing. Then I went inside. The man at the front desk was young, maybe 25, with a name tag that said Corey. I told him I had lost my phone, that I had been in a difficult situation, and that I had $11 plus 20. He looked at me for a moment. I must have looked like something the mountain had spit out, my shoes muddy, my hair halfway out of its clip. And he said, "Let me see what I can do." He put me in a room for the night and charged me $22 and did not make me feel like a charity case. I think about Corey often. I use the room phone to call my neighbor back home in Asheville. Her name is Faye, and we have lived 4 houses apart for 19 years. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "Sylvia, tell me what you need." Faye drove up that night. She brought my spare house key I had given her 1 year ago after I locked myself out, and an envelope with $200 cash and a bag with a change of clothes and my blood pressure medication, which she found exactly where I said it would be, on the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker. She also brought something I had not thought to ask for, my husband's old address book. It had the name and number of the attorney who had handled our estate planning. I had forgotten we even had one. That attorney's name is Howard, and when I called him the next morning from Faye's cell phone, he did not seem surprised to hear from me. He seemed angry, which was what I needed. Here is what my daughter and her husband had done, or tried to do. 6 weeks before our trip to the mountains, my daughter had begun the paperwork to have me declared incapacitated. She had found a doctor, I still do not know how, who had signed a statement saying I had showed signs of significant cognitive decline. She had also, 2 months before that, convinced me to sign a document she described as updating my beneficiary information after her father died. I had signed it at the kitchen table while she poured me coffee and talked about how complicated estate paperwork was. What I'd actually signed was a durable power of attorney, naming her as my agent. With that document and the incapacity filing, she would have control of my finances. The life insurance policy my husband had taken out 30 years ago, $240,000, listed me as the primary beneficiary, but she was secondary. If I was declared dead or incapacitated and then died without declaration being challenged, the money was hers. The house was worth $380,000 by last year's assessment, paid off. 32 years of mortgage payments, my husband working overtime at the plant for a decade to get us there. She wanted all of it. Her husband had a business that was failing. I had not known how badly, and they had apparently decided that waiting for me to die of natural causes was not part of their plan. Howard made some calls. He contacted the county where the incapacity filing had been made and had it challenged immediately on the basis that I was alive, present, and speaking entirely clearly. He contacted the insurance company and placed a hold on any payout. He found a real estate attorney who confirmed that no action had been taken on the house, yet they had been waiting for the legal declarations to finalize. I had come back in time. By 4 days, Howard estimated. I did not go home right away. I want to be honest about that. I stayed at Faye's house for 2 weeks, sleeping in her guest room, which smells like lavender because she keeps a sachet in the dresser drawer. I took my blood pressure medication every morning. I ate real meals. I let myself be very quiet for a while. During that time, Howard filed a police report on my behalf with the Blount County Sheriff's Office in Tennessee. Filing it in the jurisdiction where the abandonment occurred was important, he said, because it established the criminal act separately from the financial crimes, which were in a different county. My daughter called my cell phone twice during those 2 weeks. I had a new phone by then. Faye took me to the Verizon store, and I watched the screen light up with her name, and I let it ring. I did not block her. I needed to know if she would try anything else. The second time she called, she left a voicemail. She said she was worried about me. She said they had gone back to look for me, and I was gone. She said she had filed a missing persons report. She had, in fact, filed a missing persons report. Howard found this useful later. It demonstrated, he said, that she had known I was missing, that she had direct knowledge of when and where I went missing, which somewhat undermined any claim that she hadn't been present. I listened to that voicemail 3 times. Then I saved it. My son lives in Portland. He is my younger child, and he and his sister have never been close, and he and I had also grown somewhat distant after his father died. Grief does strange things to families. I called him from Faye's house on a Tuesday evening, and I told him everything. He was on a plane to Asheville 2 days later. He is the one who came to the house with me when I went back. He is the one who stood in my kitchen while I looked at every room, checking what had been moved or taken. Not much had been disturbed yet. They had been waiting for the legal process. But my husband's watch was missing from the nightstand drawer. It was not an expensive watch. It was a Timex with a worn leather band, and my husband had worn it for 30 years. I stood in the bedroom doorway and I told my son, and he put his hand on my shoulder and didn't say anything, which was exactly right. Howard filed the criminal charges on a Thursday: attempted insurance fraud, financial exploitation of an older adult, which is a felony in North Carolina, filing false documents, the fraudulent medical statement, and a charge related to the abandonment which the Tennessee prosecutor ultimately took on as reckless endangerment. My daughter was arrested on a Friday morning. Her husband was arrested the same day. The hearing I want to tell you about happened about 6 weeks later. Not the criminal trial. That took much longer, but a civil hearing about the power of attorney, about having it revoked and nullified. My daughter's attorney argued that I had signed it willingly and with full understanding. I walked into that courtroom with Howard beside me and sat down at the plaintiff's table, and my daughter was already there, across the room. She did not look at me when I came in. She looked at her hands. Her husband sat beside her in a suit that was slightly too big for him, like he had borrowed it or lost weight since he bought it. The judge was a woman, which I had not expected, and she had the kind of face that does not perform patience. She simply had it. She asked me directly at one point whether I understood what I had signed when I gave my daughter power of attorney. I said, "Your Honor, I was told I was updating my insurance beneficiaries. I was not told what I was signing." She wrote something down. Howard presented the voicemail. He presented the phone records showing my daughter's phone had placed a call to the number of the doctor who signed the incapacity statement 3 times in the 2 weeks before the filing. He presented the timeline of the bank account changes my daughter had attempted to initiate using the power of attorney. The power of attorney was revoked. The judge used the word unconscionable. Afterward, in the hallway, my daughter tried to speak to me. She said my name, Sylvia, and I stopped walking, and I looked at her, and I waited to see what she would offer. She said, "I don't expect you to understand." I said, "I understand everything." Then I kept walking. The criminal case took 14 months from arrest to sentencing. I am not going to walk through all of it because parts of it were tedious and other parts were very painful, and I do not want to linger in those rooms any longer than I already have. What I will tell you is the outcome. My daughter received 4 years probation, a fine of $40,000, which was meant to approximate some of the legal and financial costs she had caused, and a requirement to complete 200 hours of community service. Her husband received the same probation term and a suspended sentence that could be activated if he violated its terms. The reckless endangerment charge from Tennessee resulted in a separate fine and a 1-year suspended sentence for both of them. There is no version of that outcome that feels like enough. I know that. Howard knew it when he told me, and he said so plainly, which I appreciated. He said, "The law is a blunt instrument, Sylvia. I'm sorry it can't do more." I told him the law had done more than I had any right to expect from a rock in the mountains on a Wednesday afternoon in October. My husband's watch was recovered. It had been pawned. They found the ticket in a drawer during the search. The pawn shop still had it. My son drove to get it and brought it back to me in a small paper bag, and I put it back in the nightstand drawer where it belongs. The house is mine. I had the locks changed twice, once right away, and then again 6 months later, just because it made me feel better. I planted a lilac bush near the front porch in the spring because I had always meant to and kept putting it off. It bloomed this year for the first time, small and pale purple, and I stood on the porch and looked at it for a long time. Faye comes for dinner on Thursdays. My son calls every Sunday, sometimes twice. He has been talking about moving back to the East Coast, and I do not ask him to, but I do not tell him not to either. I take my blood pressure medication every morning at 8 o'clock. I keep a spare in my car now. I have not heard from my daughter since the hallway outside the courtroom. I do not know if that is something I should feel more about than I do. I have had a long time to sit with the question of whether I owe her grief or forgiveness or anything at all. What I have settled on is this: I do not owe her anything. She made her calculation about what I was worth, and I made mine about what I have left to spend. And I intend to spend every last bit of it. This coming October the leaves will turn again in the Smoky Mountains. I know, because they always do. I have no plans to go back and look at them, but I am still here. And that, it turns out, is the only revenge that ever mattered. I have thought a lot about what makes a person capable of doing what my daughter did. Not obsessively. I made a decision early on not to let that question eat up what time I have left, but honestly. Because I think it matters to understand it, not to excuse it, but to see it clearly. What I keep coming back to is this: she did not wake up one morning and decide to be a monster. It happened in steps. Small compromises, small justifications, one calculation leading to the next. Her husband's business was failing, and she looked at my house and my life insurance policy, and somewhere in that looking, she stopped seeing her mother and started seeing a problem to be solved. That is not a thing that happens overnight. It is a thing that happens when a person stops paying attention to the difference between right and wrong, stops practicing that attention, the way you stop being able to lift something heavy if you never use those muscles. There is a consequence to that kind of slow moral erosion, not in any mystical sense, not some force in the universe keeping score. I do not believe in that. I mean something simpler and more mechanical. The choices you make shape the person you become, and the person you become makes further choices, and eventually those choices catch up with the world outside your own head. My daughter chose and chose and chose again, and those choices led her to a courtroom in North Carolina where a judge used the word unconscionable, and a probation officer handed her paperwork that will follow her for 4 years. What saved me was not luck, though luck was part of it. The woman in the pickup truck, Corey at the Days Inn, the fact that Faye had my spare key. What saved me more than anything was that I had spent 67 years building a life that had other people in it. Faye, who drove 2 hours that same night without being asked twice. Howard, whose number was in an old address book my husband had kept. My son, who got on a plane. I had not built those relationships because I expected them to rescue me. I had built them because connection is what a life is made of, and when I needed them, they were there. That is the thing I want to say most directly. The way you live your ordinary days is not separate from how you survive your worst ones. Sylvia, who called her neighbor, remembered her attorney, stayed calm on a rock in the mountains. She was built from 30 years of small choices, just like my daughter was. We are both, in that sense, the sum of what we practiced. Wisdom is not something that arrives. It is something you accumulate the hard way, through paying attention to what is true even when the truth is uncomfortable. I paid attention that afternoon on the mountain. I did not sit and wait to be saved. I stood up and I walked. Strength is the same. It is not loudness or defiance. It is continuing to move when your knee aches and you do not know which fork in the path leads back to the road. It is calling your attorney before you call anyone else, because you know that what happened to you was a crime and you are going to treat it like one. And decency, just ordinary decency, is what the woman in the truck showed me, and Corey showed me, and Faye showed me again and again. It does not require heroism. It just requires paying attention to the person in front of you. I still have the house. I planted a lilac by the porch this spring. My son calls on Sundays. I take my blood pressure medication every morning at 8, and I keep a spare in the car now because I learned. That is what I would tell anyone listening. Learn from it and keep moving.